What is going on, NBA fans? Welcome into another week of Dropping Dimes. I'm your host, Matt Knost, here with a weird show. There's no other way to describe it. Much like last week, I don't know what to talk about other than, last week I didn't. Last week I avoided and did all-time records. This week I'm avoiding NBA action and gonna sit down and talk about COVID, how it's impacting the league, what the league plans on doing right now, um, what the options are that are being presented. Basically, it's impossible to assess what is going on in the league right now because chunks of these rosters are guys that have never played an NBA game or, you know, as coming out over the past 24 to 48 hours, guys that haven't played in the league in a few years are being signed onto teams. So it's like, team A lost to team B last night, and then you look at the rosters and be like, "Well, shit. I who I mean, how can you make heads or tails of this? Uh just because there's so much flux within the lineups, that it's just impossible to get a lay of the land. There's very few teams. Phoenix is basically the only one. It full health hasn't really been impacted. I mean, there are others, but they're the top tier teams. They're the only one that hasn't really had anybody out with any kind of COVID protocols. And as of right now, there are 80 plus players sitting out for health and safety protocols. 80 plus. And Adam Silver did an interview and he said 90% of the guys being tested are coming back positive are Omicron. So Omicron is the predominant that's not even a strong enough word, uh, but is the predominant strain that is taking over the NBA right now. And so the league is reevaluating various protocols that they have in place right now. Currently, if a player sits out, they're out for 10 days or they have to return 2 negative PCR tests and that are more than 24 hours apart. So, basically they're talking about if players have a booster after already being vaccinated, the data that they've collected from players is that they can get through the testing quicker and they can return 2 negative. Sorry, piece of my breakfast there was in my. There it is. Uh, because if they have the booster, they can get to 2 negative PCR tests quicker than they can if they just have the vaccine, and even quicker than if they were unvaccinated. So right now they're sitting at 65% of the league has had the booster shots, on top of 97% overall have been vaccinated. So they're saying 65% of that 95% or 97%, I believe is the breakdown of it, have had their boosters. Now, some people aren't able to get a booster because they had the Johnson and Johnson, and there is no booster available for that right now. Um, and the solve could be the release today from an announcement from Walter Reed that they have a pan vaccine that will attack all variants and future variants, and train your body's immune system to fend off those things. And perhaps once testing is fully completed on that, they'll roll it out in the league and that'll solve the bulk of the problems. But so as far as protocols, so if they take into account the new data they have, they could reduce the number of days um, that a player has to sit out. But also because of the rampant spread of COVID/Omicron, starting on December 26th, the NBA and the Players Association have agreed to restore game day testing for players and staff, um, with the exception of those people that have had the booster within the past 2 weeks or further out. So you need to have had the booster for 2 weeks before they'll stop doing the everyday testing. Um, and also they'll have to go back to wearing a mask on the bench at team facilities and while they're traveling and on the road. Um, Perhaps further institutions would be you can't leave your hotel rooms like last season. Um, and who knows what other, I mean, a potential other one is um, reducing capacities at venues right now. Currently, the Raptors are the only team whose venue reduces capacity to 50%. But if things keep going the trajectory that they are right now, I'm sure New York will follow suit on that pretty quickly if it looks apparent, as well as Golden State and Los Angeles and potentially other cities. Any major large condensed city, I think they could be looking at reinstituting 50% or possibly going to no fans and just players playing the games and then they go back to the hotels. Um, the NBA, the Players Association, and the players in general do not want to pause the season and they want to limit the number of postponed games that they have. Um, I think the pausing the season or going to the bubble, I don't think anybody on either side of this debate wants that in regards to the league, ownership, players association, any of it. Nobody wants to pause or go to the bubble. So if that means instituting these other things, it's entirely possible. The postponements get tricky. So right now, there have been 9 games so far that have been postponed. Was Pistons at Bulls on the December 14th, Bulls at Raptors on the 16th, Cavs at Hawks on the 19th, Nuggets at Nets on the 19th, Pels at Sixers on the 19th, Magic at Raptors on the 20th, Wizards at Nets on the 21st, Raptors at Bulls tonight, and then Nets at Blazers tonight. There are your 9 games so far that have been postponed. And the trickiness with postponement, because you could say, oh, maybe they just postpone a bunch of these games and we do like a mini pause, um, and we make the games up later. Well, the playoff schedule is to some degree set in stone. They can flex a little bit of that, but then you're getting into we're selling advertising space on the finals coming up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We need this to end at a certain point. So also the players can get enough rest and we can get into training camps and all that jazz for next season. We don't want to have that rushed leap back into next season like we had 2 seasons ago. Um, Secondarily, they can postpone the games, but obviously they have to make them up at some point. And these teams don't just have carte blanche to do whatever they want in their arenas. The arenas have booked out nights to concerts or whatever the case is. It could be like Staples, where potentially you're up. There's 2 teams, 2 NBA teams, plus an NHL team that all share that venue. So if you're going to postpone those games, you're going to have to make them up at weird times. So we could see, 10 a.m. start times or 2 p.m. start times for games at the end of the season just because they got to make up a whole bunch of these things. So the postponement gets really dicey later on, especially for teams like the Bulls, the Raptors, and the Nets now who are leading the charge in the most postponements. They're going to have to make up a bunch of games at the end of the season or at some point here because the league has shifted away from back-to-backs and 3 and 5s as much as they can to give players a bunch of rest. But with these postponements, like all those are out the window. So 3 and 5s or maybe even 5 and 7s, which is 3 games in 5 nights, 5 games in 7 nights, are going to be on the docket for a number of teams towards the end of the season, and that can get taxing. And then, okay, so if that is the case, teams will be fined in previous seasons if they rested guys, especially for like nationally televised games. But in this instance, if they're making playoff pushes and they weren't anticipating having to play their guys this much late in the season, are they going to get fined then for resting certain guys? Um, at the end of the season. I would hope that the NBA would be lax on that and just say, not this season. We'll worry about it when we have our regular circumstances affecting teams. But I mean, it's getting weird out there. It started with the player dispensations, and there were exceptions to the dispensation and dispensations for the dispensation, and teams are adding players, and as soon as they get the player, they start testing them, and then that player has to go into health and safety protocols, which happened to the Bulls. There are guys right now signing into the league. Joe Johnson signed today for the Celtics. He is 40 years old and hasn't played in the league in 3 years, and the speculation is that he is going to start tonight, I believe is what I saw. I know he's going to play tonight. He's 40 years old. Lance Stephenson's been called up. The Mavs signed a guy named Charlie Brown, for Christ's sakes. Charlie Brown is going to be in a Mavs jersey in the very near future. We all know that Isaiah Thomas got the call up, had a good game one, had a terrible game two. Most of the Lakers had a terrible game two or game last night. But there's all kinds of guys who are getting an opportunity to play in the league that otherwise would not. And it's really perhaps the silver lining of this is a couple of them will be good enough and have played well enough that they'll be able to hang on and secure like a 11th or 12th spot in the NBA. And this was the door that opened for them to prove that they were good enough to play in this league. And there have to be a handful of guys out there right now that could, fit that bill. But the vast majority that as soon as these 10-day contracts run up, and if teams no longer need the player, they will never play another minute of NBA basketball. I mean, in no world should Joe Johnson be signed and starting all in the course of one fell swoop. It just doesn't make sense. And Joe Johnson, I'm sure, still has something left in the tank. He's been playing in the Big Three the past 3 years. He's got 2 championships with the Big Three. So congratulations on those. I'm sure they're hard fought and deserved. But he's 40 years old, coming off the scrap heap. He hasn't played in the league in 3 years. Lance Stevenson hasn't played in the league in 2 years. Now he's younger, but there's a reason Lance, was out. And just all these variations, like the league is scrambling to figure out how not to have postponements. And then we get to the looming next deadline, which is the Christmas Day games. It's one of the biggest marquee events for the NBA every season. The NFL owns here in the States Thanksgiving. The NBA owns Christmas. Now, it's not the same. The NFL like flat out owns Thanksgiving, and the NBA doesn't do anywhere near the numbers the NFL does, but nobody does. But still, it's an entire day of NBA action. I'm a big fan, obviously. But this year, they've already announced that teams that are scheduled to be on those 5 games, they might shift around who actually gets the ABC games because that's what they're most concerned with. And the ABC games play these are Eastern Conference or East Coast times, which is 2:30, 5, and 8 p.m. And those are your 3 start times. But the NBA has told the other 2 teams or the other 2 games that are scheduled, hey, we might flex you into this and you'll be on ABC at this time. Because right now, your scheduled games at 2:30, it's Boston at Milwaukee. Boston has currently 6 players in health and safety protocols. Al Horford, Hernan Gomez, Jabari Parker, Grant Williams, Josh Richardson, Jeff Hauser. Milwaukee has 4, and Giannis, Portis, Wes Matthews, and DiVincenzo. That's the 2:30 game. With Giannis out, if Giannis was in, I think they're good to go. Don't need to flex that one out. Maybe they will. Golden State at Phoenix at 5 o'clock. I think that game stays. Golden State has 2 guys out, Jordan Poole and Andrew Wiggins. Phoenix has nobody. You have Steph, you have CP3 and Booker. I think that's enough for the NBA to say we're going to go ahead and go forward with that game. Sorry about that. The 8 o'clock game is definitely going to be flexed out. There's no way that it's not, because it's Nets at Lakers, and you've got, and mind you, guys out does not take into account injuries. This is just health and safety protocols. Guys out currently, right now, today, um, which stands to reason that the vast majority of these will be out. But Nets at Lakers, the Nets have 10 guys in health and safety. KD, Harden, Kyrie, Millsap, Aldridge, Bruce Brown, James Johnson, DeAndre Bembry, Javon Carter, and Day'Ron Sharp. The Lakers have 2 plus their coach, Avery Bradley and Kent Bazemore, and Vogel's out, plus AD is hurt. That game is getting flexed out. The other 2 games slated are Atlanta at New York and Dallas at Utah. So you'd assume, given the late start, it would be Dallas at Utah. That would be the easiest flex in. Dallas has Tim Hardaway Jr., Maxi Kleber, Reggie Bullock, and Josh Green out for health and safety protocols. Utah has 0. So Nets Lakers would be out, I guess, hypothetically. This game would be in. Otherwise, they flex the Golden State game to the 8 o'clock and put the Utah and Dallas game at 5 o'clock, because the Atlanta-New York game, Trae Young, Danilo Gallinari, and Clint Capella are out for the Hawks. And for the Knicks, it's R.J. Barrett, Obi Toppin, Emmanuel Quickley, Kevin Knox, Miles McBride, and Quentin Grimes. Like, dear God. I mean, there's so many guys, but that Nets-Lakers, there's 10 guys for the Nets. Just be thankful that the NBA hadn't scheduled Nets versus a couple other teams and be like, well, the Nets are missing 10. What if it was Nets Raptors, even though the Raptors aren't, good enough to qualify this season? But, oh, look at that. Jeremy Bowers in the chat says Luka and health and safety protocol now broke about 30 minutes ago. All right. Well, then I don't know what the league does, because they have no real viable option. I perhaps you flex the Knicks Hawks into the 2:30 game, push the Bucks Celtics to the 5, and then Golden State and Phoenix to the 8. I mean, that's just brutal. And that's just one day's games right now. So, postpone and pause are going to be the 2 P words you're going to hear more often than not over the next week and a half or so. And I love that they're basically not going to start testing, religiously until the 26th, because they don't want any more positives that would screw up these games, because they need these games to go off, because it's a marquee day. They've already sold high-end advertising and they need eyeballs. And it's just not going to happen. I mean, I almost feel like they should just flex out teams. Okay, keep the Lakers. Let's drop the Nets and move a different team in to play. And we'll just have, if that game was slated to happen in 3 days, well, that game is no longer existing. And then we'll just have the Lakers-Nets game then, or something like that. It's not that easy, because you then have to travel, the arenas. There's too many things to juggle. So they got 5 games to play with. And there's no way. I can't imagine a world in which this Lakers game goes forward, unless the marquee nature of just at least having LeBron and Westbrook and the Lakers as a name out there is enough. But nobody's going to watch. Who the hell cares? It's Lakers versus laundry. So the Nets are not the Nets. I mean, now with Kyrie back, which the Nets capitulated on that stance because of all the guys being out, and there's all kinds of speculation as to what happened there. I heard that KD and possibly Harden went to Sean Marks and told him, just let the guy play. We are completely ravaged by injury right now and health and safety protocols. We don't have the bodies. And KD is playing 37 minutes a night, which is the most he's played since the 2013-14 season, coming off a repaired Achilles tendon. That can't be good, even though he's playing fantastic basketball right now. But with their 10 guys out, plus Joe Harris being injured, it's like this team is, I don't even know what this team is. That's like why I struggled to come up with anything other than talking about COVID today. The only angle I could come up with was talking about John Morant coming back to Memphis and what that means for Memphis, because statistically speaking, they've been better when he's been out. But how much of that is a function of the teams they're playing might have been decimated by key injuries, or it just took them a little bit of time to gel. Like this, but I'm happy to have that discussion. But everything else, when you look at it and be like, oh, hey, another solid win for, such and such team. And then you go and look at the box score and be like, well, Jesus, the other team was missing 4 guys. So does this win have any meaning, or does this loss have any meaning? I have no idea. But I mean, this is where we're at right now with the NBA scrambling to figure out what they're going to do. And I don't have any answers. I'm just a fan like you are. I watch from afar. I watch a bunch of the games. It's getting weirder and weirder when you're seeing players that you either haven't seen in a while or don't have the slightest clue, that you have to Google search. Who in the world is number 26? I don't even physically recognize them, let alone their game or face, the color of their hair, like nothing. You look it up and you're like, never heard of this guy. Oh, he was on the G League team here, played college basketball here. And like, okay, so this dude's getting run. I mean, Charlie Brown, for Christ's sakes, is now in the league. So it's really weird. But I don't think nobody wants to postpone this. So I don't know how, or no one wants to pause this, rather. I just don't know how many postponements we can manage, how many are feasible, because last season the league had more postponements up until this point, but the benefit that the league had was they didn't release the second half of the schedule to give themselves flexibility to deal with the postponements from the first half of the schedule. They don't have that this time. They have the set in stone. We've already booked with the arenas, told them these are the dates that we are going to use. So I'm guessing if you live in a city late in the season and your team has had postponements, you might be able to get a cheap, Tuesday at noon ticket. That's the silver lining for us. I'll be interested to see. I supposed to be going to a game in January, in the middle of like second week of January, and I have not bought tickets yet. I should potentially go ahead and buy tickets, because if the Los Angeles shifts to 50% capacity or something, perhaps I luck out and get my seats before they're near capacity and they just start ramping down the availability of tickets. But then I don't even know what you do at that point. Do you reimburse season ticket holders? Because then there's the people that do it they sell every ticket on the resale market, and that's a viable income stream for them. And if you take away half of the games that they have available, like if they do a 50% capacity, and of that, then it's a oscillating turn as to who loses their seats for this game. And what if you're the unlucky soul that gets an entire slate of Rockets, OKC, Pistons, Magic? You get all those games and lose the Nets, Lakers, Bulls, Like anybody that's got a name that and a fan base that would draw and be able to inflate the sales of your tickets, like I don't even know how they do that. Um, so it'll be interesting. Uh, but yeah, that's where we're at. I have no real discussion planned beyond COVID. So if anybody that's watching or in the chat, you want to talk about something specific, go right ahead, fire it in because I got nothing as of right now. I mean, we could talk about the various games that have transpired. Um, I don't mind discussing teams that are dealing with injuries. Like, last night the Lakers lost, and the Lakers, LeBron was quoted saying, well, they're at full health and we're not. And while true, you only have two out for health and safety, and AD being hurt is part of having Anthony Davis on your team. So that legitimately counts. Kent Bazemore and Avery Bradley should not swing the fortunes of your team, and dealing with Anthony Davis not playing tonight is part of having Anthony Davis on your team. Um, so if there's anything in the chat you want to discuss, feel free, rifle it in. As far as the Grizzlies that I brought up before, yeah, if you go look at their numbers, offensively, they're roughly the same without Ja, but defensively is where it gets interesting as all hell. Because I think Ja's personal plus minus is sorry, I don't have this in my notes because I just kind of stopped doing the research and moved over to COVID. Um, I think Ja's personal net rating is a negative to 6.7. It's 6 point something, but I want to say it's negative 6.7, and the team's is a negative with him out there. And then when he has been off the court and not playing, they suddenly vault into a top 10 defense. The players have been questioned about this because it became a narrative. And they all have said what I believe too. That's a bunch of horse, shit. I don't know why I was stopping myself from cursing when I've cursed already on this show, but it's a bunch of horse shit. You can't subtract somebody of that quality and caliber and be a better team long term. It just doesn't make sense. And then Ja was talking about hearing the fans saying that to him, and he was honest about it, which I was, surprised by the fact that it hurt him. He wasn't anticipating this from the fans who would normally cheer him and applaud what he does out there. So to hear the fans turn on him and basically saying, "We're better without you," he said it did have an effect on him. He kind of took that to heart, and the only thing he can do, according to him, is basically just go out there and play as hard as he can and prove him wrong. Now, perhaps it will give him motivation, and I hope that it does. There have been instances where players do hear that criticism and work on that aspect of the game that they're getting criticized for, which we all would more than likely do. Nobody wants to be criticized for something that they could change or they don't feel is fully just. Um, Sometimes the criticism is about something that you can't change. But other aspects, like there's a clip floating around today with the Draymond Green talking about Jokic coming up to him after Draymond had done a segment in the playoffs criticizing his defense. And he, according to Draymond, he had 4 clips queued up and was breaking down where Jokic was failing on defense. And Jokic came up to him the next season and said, "You were right. And I need to work on that. And I need to get better." So instead of getting defensive, which some people will do, it's a response that is to be expected amongst others. Jokic took it to heart and was like, "Okay, I can learn from this. This is a teachable moment, and I can learn from this and potentially fix, some of the things that he brought up. perhaps some of those things I'll never be able to fix, and there's nothing I can do about that. Or shit on that play that he's very specifically talking about. I remember it distinctly, and I was so gassed because I'm carrying the team on my back, um, because we're so undermanned that I didn't have enough left in the tank to try and go do something on the defensive end here. That's perfectly reasonable. And if you look at Jokic right now, he's having an even better season than he had last year. He's probably not going to win MVP because the team is nowhere near as good. And yet, if you took him off that team, they would be in the lottery, and who knows how many wins they would have. It's a testament to how good he's playing. And don't fuck with Jokic because Markieff Morris still hasn't played a game since he took his cheap shot on Jokic, and then Jokic came up and just barreled into him from behind. And I still side with Jokic on this. The Morris brothers have a history of doing this, and it was a matter of time before someone basically gave it to him as good as they give it. Um, Perhaps you disagree. That's fine. I don't care. The Morris brothers both have a track record of doing this bullshit. So Markeith still being out, I'm not crying. I'm not losing any sleep over that. I'm not crying any tears for it. It's not going to happen. If he was a beloved dude or somebody that's never had any of these problems, yeah, then it'd be like, Jokic, you're an asshole. There was no need for that. But that ain't the case, and we all know it. So, Ja, hopefully you take to heart the criticism, treat it as constructive criticism, and work on defensively what you're able to do. They still need you to be a driver on offense, and by driver I mean a driver of the offense itself. You need to be the engine as well as the general out there on the floor. So you're not going to be able to change that aspect of your physical output. Otherwise, the wheels are going to fall off this offense. You could say not so much. When he was out, the offense looked relatively the same. Yeah, it does. But when it comes playoff time, you need a guy that can go get you a bucket. Ultimately, that's what the game comes down to. Can you get a stop and can you get a bucket? I realize it is reductive to boil it down to its simplest form. But in the playoffs, man, how many times have you watched a game where it's just we need to get our best player on an island, run some actions off ball so that if they come to double him, we can kick out to an open shooter somewhere or just, zing the ball around. But to know that you have somebody in your back pocket that is unafraid to get a shot and to get a good shot. If it doesn't go in, fine, but just get a good shot. That is worth its weight in gold in the NBA. There's very few guys that have that ability that A, a team is willing to trust in, B, his teammates are willing to trust in, and C, can't deliver on that. Like Shea Gilgeous right now is developing that to a great degree. Now, it bit him in the ass in the not too distant past, like say against the Pelicans, where he threw up a prayer, it went in, but that isn't the first long distance three that he's shot at the end of a game this season. And then Devontae Graham turned around and made the longest game winning shot in NBA history. But Shea Gilgeous has gotten to the degree where I would trust him now in these late game moments he's got the stones, and I believe the shot is going to go in. So long as OKC continues to find themselves in these situations, they got a gunner late that you can trust. So that's always a positive. So Tim Williams asking if there are any NBA gamblers in the crowd today. I know he tweeted me that he went 4 for 4 on the Phoenix game last night. I think the nicest pull, he chose Cam Johnson at plus 2.5 threes. And Cam Johnson and Devin Booker were the only ones that shot the three ball well last night. I think even across both teams. Like the Lakers shot something like 20% from three last night, and the Suns shot like 29%. And Cam and Booker were at 50% or better between the two of them. And that just shows you how piss poor the Suns shot. And I don't think the Lakers had anybody sniffing those kind of numbers. But that was a nice pull. So yeah, maybe we start a little offshoot of this NBA gambling pod, although there's got to be 57,000 of those at this point. Um, Plus, I don't want this year's too strange to make heads or tails. Like Phoenix is a team you can't bet on because they've had consistency and guys have been out for injury, but not for health and safety, where they haven't been this special dispensation nonsense where you got assign guy after guy after guy to 10-day contracts just to fill out to have the requisite number of players, which is 8, to field a team so a game can carry on. Um, so Phoenix, they have a sample size now that you can kind of bet with. Whereas other teams are just like, I don't know. I don't know. We haven't had enough time together as a unit, or we've had so many guys now out of the lineup that what are going to be the effects of them coming back? They could be asymptomatic from from getting COVID again or COVID. But perhaps they're not. And then, you know, I'm thinking of my Bulls in particular. It's like Kobe White was out for the first part of the season, so he hasn't gotten a full acclimation to the new team. He got a couple games in, and then we started getting hit with COVID. So he's continued to play, but it's still the full entire team um, has not played together. So it's like they don't have they're not speaking fully the same language yet as a team. And I think there's a lot of teams that fall into that category. Some like the Nets, when you have a true apex predator like Kevin Durant, well, that can help you gloss over imperfections and slow nights by other players when he's going to shoot so otherworldly. So Tim, just as a follow-up, don't bet on results. Anything can happen. Bet on player stats. Yeah, I would agree with that more often than not. A couple of years ago, I had a friend that kept going to Vegas over the NBA playoffs. And by kept going, he went, 3, maybe 4 times. And I just would get a text from him. I'm like, oh, you're in Vegas again? And he doesn't even like to gamble. It just, he had friends going out there and he had nothing better to do. And he's like, screw it. I'll go to Vegas. And he texted me the sheet that he got because his friends like to go to the sports book. And I had a wildly successful off season for him, so much so that he took me out to one hell of a meal as a thank you. But it was almost all on player stats. I don't think I recommended more than a couple outcomes, but it was all, will player X get, with points and rebounds combined above this or below this, like plus minus type of thing. And did that over and over and over again. And it's easy to track, especially during the playoffs, and be like, oh, well, such and such got banged up the previous game. So my guess is they're going to rely on these other individuals more, which should inflate their stats. Put your money there. So yeah. So Tim Williams is asking about the best NBA commercials. I don't really want to discuss that. It's a fun discussion, but at the same time, it's like, that's not what I want to sit down and do on a show like this. But I appreciate the suggestion. All right. Well, I think weird as it is, this will be the shortest show that I do for a while. Hopefully next week we're post the Christmas games and there's something to talk about outside of these random lineups and the names from NBA yesteryear that are signing 10-day contracts. So I think that's it for today's Dropping Dimes. I hope everybody out there is staying safe. Enjoy if you celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas. If you celebrate Hanukkah, I hope you enjoyed your Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or whatever you celebrate this time of year. Happy holidays to you. Stay safe out there. And hopefully we'll see you guys on the other side of the holidays and you're well. So that is it for Dropping Dimes today. I'll see you guys next week with another edition. Until then, adios.